A team of divers just pulled something out of the Aegean Sea that might force us to rewrite everything we thought we knew about the most famous shipwreck on Earth. For over 100 years, one object from this wreck has dominated every headline, every documentary, every textbook. But in the summer of 2024, archaeologists went back down and found evidence of something almost nobody expected: a second ship. And if that's true, the story we've been telling about ancient Greek genius for the last century might only be half the picture. Let's go back to where this all began, because you can't understand why 2024 matters without understanding what came before it. In April of 1900, a fleet of sponge diving boats from the small Greek island of Symi got caught in a storm on their way home from the fishing grounds off North Africa. They took shelter near a barren, wind-scoured rock in the strait between Crete and the Peloponnese, an island so small and forgotten that almost nobody outside the region had ever heard its name: Antikythera. While they waited for the weather to pass, the captain figured he might as well send a diver down to see if there were any sponges worth collecting on the seafloor below. What that diver found instead would become one of the most important archaeological discoveries in human history. The diver's name was Elias Stadiatus. He went down about 50 meters, deep enough that the light turns flat and gray, and the pressure starts messing with your head. When he came back up, he was frantic, insisting he'd seen bodies scattered across the seabed, men and horses, heaps of the dead lying in the gloom. His captain assumed nitrogen narcosis had gotten to him and went down himself to check. What he found were not corpses. They were statues, bronze and marble figures that had tumbled out of a ship that broke apart on the surface and sank straight to the bottom, sometime around 60 years before the birth of Christ. 2,000 years of corrosion had twisted the bronze into strange, organic shapes and softened the marble until, in the dim light, an arm really did look like an arm reaching out of a grave. What followed was the first major underwater archaeological excavation in history, and it came at a brutal cost. These divers had no scuba gear, no dive tables, nothing but a canvas suit, a bolted bronze helmet, and an air hose running up to a hand-cranked pump on deck. Over roughly 2 years of work, they hauled up an extraordinary collection of Hellenistic art: bronze figures, weathered marble heads, amphorae by the dozen, coins, glassware. One diver died from decompression sickness. 2 more were left permanently disabled. It was, by any measure, one of the richest troves of ancient art ever pulled from the sea, and it nearly cost these men everything. Buried among all that beautiful, obvious treasure was a small, unremarkable lump of corroded bronze that nobody paid attention to for months. It sat in the National Museum in Athens, dismissed as scrap, while curators focused on cataloging the statues. Then in 1902, a Greek archaeologist named Valerios Stais noticed that the lump had cracked open as it dried, and inside were teeth. Not human teeth. Gear teeth. Precisely cut, interlocking bronze gears, the kind of mechanical sophistication nobody associated with the ancient world. That object became known as the Antikythera Mechanism, and decades of research using X-ray imaging and eventually 3D CT scanning revealed it to be an analog astronomical computer. Over 30 interlocking gears that tracked the phases of the moon, predicted solar and lunar eclipses years in advance, modeled the movements of the 5 visible planets, and even accounted for the fact that the moon's orbit isn't a perfect circle, a detail of celestial mechanics that Europe wouldn't formally work out again until Kepler, some 17 centuries later. Engraved across its plates were thousands of tiny Greek letters, essentially an instruction manual. Some characters no taller than a grain of rice. For over 100 years, this device has been treated as a total anomaly. A machine that sophisticated shouldn't exist, without a whole tradition behind it, workshops, failed prototypes, apprentices, generations of refinement. And yet nothing else remotely like it has ever turned up from antiquity. It's as if this one object fell out of the sky, got used once, and then the knowledge that built it vanished for 14 centuries. That mystery is exactly why researchers have kept going back to that same stretch of water again and again. In the 1970s, in 2012, in 2014 with an armored diving suit called the exosuit, and repeatedly through the 2020s, always asking the same question: what else did the sponge divers miss? Which brings us to 2024. From mid-May to late June, an international team working under the Return to Antikythera project, led by the Swiss School of Archaeology in Greece and the University of Geneva, in coordination with the Greek Ministry of Culture's Ephorate of Underwater Antiquities, spent 5 weeks back on the wreck site. This wasn't a casual survey. It was a systematic, methodical excavation using remotely operated vehicles, precision mapping, and mixed gas rebreathers that let divers work the site far longer and more safely than any team before them. And the weather cooperated in a way it rarely does in that strait, giving the team an unusually long, productive season. What they found was significant on multiple fronts. The single biggest discovery of the season was a substantial, well-preserved section of the ship's actual hull, wooden planking still fitted with its original copper fasteners and a protective outer coating, all in remarkably good condition after 2,000 years underwater. That might not sound as thrilling as gears or gold, but for archaeologists it's enormous. It's the first time researchers have had a large, intact piece of the vessel itself to study, giving them real evidence about how a ship of this size and class was actually built in the 1st century BC, rather than just inferring it from scattered debris, and the ship itself turned out to be bigger than anyone had confirmed before. The structural evidence points to a vessel somewhere in the range of 40 to 50 meters long, making it one of the largest ships of its era, the kind of vessel that represented a serious fortune in construction cost, cargo, and crew. This wasn't some small-time merchant chancing a cargo run. Whoever loaded that ship was moving wealth on a scale reserved for the elite. Beyond the hull, the 2024 team recovered roughly 300 individual objects or groups of objects. That included 21 marble fragments, 18 of which came from statues, along with more than 200 pottery fragments, new types of amphorae from Chios and Rhodes that hadn't been documented at the site before, and a two-handled clay cup that suggests archaeologists have now located what may have been the ship's living or galley quarters. Every piece adds another brushstroke to a picture that, until recently, was almost entirely blank. But here's the part of the story that's actually driving headlines right now, and it's the part that echoes what happened back in 1900 in an eerie way. During excavation, researchers opened a secondary area of the seabed, roughly 200 meters from the main wreck site, an area they're calling Area B. They dug into it because the pottery scattered there closely resembled what was found at the main site, Area A. What they found underneath that pottery was not more debris from the same ship. It was the remains of another wooden vessel entirely. Let that sit for a second. For over a century, the working assumption was that everything pulled from that strait, the statues, the mechanism, the amphorae, all came from a single catastrophic sinking. One ship, one storm, one tragedy. The 2024 findings suggest that might not be the whole story. There may have been 2 ships down there, possibly wrecked in the same event, possibly a different one entirely. Researchers are being careful here, and rightly so. Confirming a second ship, figuring out whether it sank alongside the first or separately, and understanding what it was actually carrying is going to take years of further excavation and analysis. Nobody is claiming certainty yet. But the physical evidence of a second hull beneath a second cargo scatter is exactly the kind of finding that changes how an entire site gets interpreted, and that reopens the question that has haunted this wreck since 1902. If there was a second ship down there, does that mean there's a chance of a second mechanism, or fragments of one? Nobody has found anything like that yet, and it would be irresponsible to promise otherwise. But think about how close the original mechanism came to being lost entirely. It sat ignored for months as a shapeless lump while curators fussed over statues. If a second device, or even scattered fragments of gearing, were sitting in unexcavated sediment at Area B, there's a real chance it could have been overlooked in exactly the same way the first one nearly was. The 2024 team's own reporting flagged several recovered objects as requiring what they carefully called further analysis, the kind of cautious, deliberately vague language archaeologists use when they've found something they're not ready to make claims about yet. What makes all of this so compelling isn't just the treasure, it's the pattern. Every single expedition back to this site, from the sponge divers in 1900 to the CT scan researchers in the mid-2000s to the international teams working there right now, has found something the previous generation missed. The statues came first, and the mechanism was ignored for months. The mechanism became world famous, and it took 70 years before anyone had the imaging technology to understand what was actually inside it. Robotic surveys in 2012 mapped the seabed and found a marble head of Hercules a decade later. And now, more than a century after the very first dive, researchers have found evidence that they might have been looking at two shipwrecks instead of one the entire time. There's also something worth remembering underneath all of this excitement about gears and hulls and cargo manifests. This wreck is not a treasure chest. It's a grave. Earlier expeditions recovered human teeth and bone fragments belonging to the people who were on board when the ship went down, and researchers have been able to extract fragments of ancient DNA from those remains. Whoever they were, sailors, merchants, or the enslaved people forced to move the plunder, they never made it to wherever that ship was headed, likely Rome, given the value and origin of the cargo. Every statue, every coin, every fragment of hull timber pulled from that seabed belonged to a moment when real people's lives ended in that strait. So where does this leave us? The Antikythera Mechanism has been treated for over 100 years as the sea's single greatest anomaly, a machine so far ahead of its time that historians struggled to explain how it could exist without a whole lost tradition behind it. The 2024 excavation didn't answer that question, but it cracked the site open in a way that makes the question feel more urgent than ever. A larger ship than anyone confirmed before. A newly documented hull section. Nearly 300 recovered artifacts. And most strikingly, solid evidence of a second wooden vessel sitting just a couple hundred meters away, waiting for archaeologists to figure out what it was and what, if anything, it was carrying. The research program at Antikythera is ongoing, and future seasons are expected to dig further into Area B specifically to determine the relationship between the two wrecks. Until then, everything about that second ship remains an open question, and that's honestly the most exciting part. This site has been worked for over 120 years, and it's still generating discoveries nobody predicted. So here's what I want to know from you. If archaeologists confirm there really were two ships down there, does that change how we should think about the mechanism, from a singular miracle to something that was possibly one of several, or does it make the whole story even stranger than we already thought? Let me know what you think in the comments, because this is a mystery that clearly isn't finished giving up its secrets.